a step down in the value of the dollar and a gradual replacement of the dollar.
Right.
My particular data shows that we live in a chaotic universe, and that the best laid plans of mice and men Afghan agley.
Sure, absolutely. And so that leaves me with the question, and I've talked about this with a lot of people who are in this sort of awakening or woo-woo world or whatever you want to call it. I've asked them, why are the elite pushing so hard ahead of 2012 to consolidate control, if it's just going to be complete chaos and a lot of people are going to die, and et cetera, et cetera. Why would this huge consolidation of power now ahead of time? Do you have any?
Well, okay, there's the problem. We must, as a radical linguist, I always stop and I say I object to why questions,
right,
because that goes to intent.
Yeah.
And I'm rarely, beyond, when I want my next cup of coffee, ever able to judge my own intent, let alone that of others.
Sure.
That having been said, then we must also acknowledge that anything that we say towards that idea is speculation.
Right.
There are some evidential points, though, that suggest that there's a huge fear wall that the powers that be have around the 2012 date. We have all kinds of evidence going back to Pope Gregory having spent a good portion of the papal treasury at the time in the 1500s to re-engineer the calendar such that the Mayan long count would end at exactly 11:11 a.m. on December 21, 2012. They put 31 German mathematicians to the task of making that occur, and they jiggered the calendar so that it would. So they've got a lot of investment in this going back 400 or 500 years.
Right.
It is, in our work, it is hugely backed by fear of an external something, which of course we can't really name because we're not the powers that be. But there are subcategories of that fear that include the idea that there would be a massive political or spiritual awakening among the populace that would undo all of their work at this very end time. And so they wish to retain control, in my opinion, or speculation,
right,
all the way up to the end of 2012 because they want to, at the last minute, bolt down their rabbit hole and pull the door behind them,
right,
leaving the rest of us to face whatever it is that they fear. And that's pretty much a general, broad description of their endgame plans. And you could see that if things collapse too early, and they bolt for their rabbit holes, say, a year in advance, well, that gives us a year to go find shovels and dig them all out.
Right, and to build our own ships.
Correct, and they wouldn't want that.
Right.
Then you have to also go along on something else.
Yeah.
And that is the fact that I understand that you're on a college.
Yeah, we're here at MIT. I'm a grad student.
The height of the scientism religion. Yes, you guys are right in the place of the sorcerers, the Vatican, if you will, of the science religion. And I'm a scientist by nature, although I'm educated and not schooled.
Sure.
And that gives me a huge advantage over the academics. But I recognize both out-of-place artifacts within archaeology and the fact that we live in an extremely chaotic planet that has cyclic cataclysms that in those cycles appear to be around the 11,000 to 500 to 12,000 year cycles. We're 11,804 years since the last cataclysm. There's a whole lot of suggestions that we're headed for another cataclysm relative to the 2012. Every single planet in the solar system is going through some kind of giant climatic upheaval, which I relate to what I call the big squeeze, having to do with these magnetic effects that are coming from the sun. Further, we know that, in my estimation, I actually did an analysis, and in 3 sites in the Mayan or Mesoamerican kingdom area, because it includes one Inca site, just in these monuments of these 3 particular sites and the layout of the cities, I figured that particular culture had 10 billion calories, human calories, invested in creating what they did.
Yeah.
And the creations all go to pointing us, this current generation, towards a specific time and the specific events which relate to the sunspot cycle. And the sunspot cycle is not merely 11 years or 22 years in length, both of which numbers, by the way, are key numbers for the Illuminati and all these secret societies, including the Skull and Bones dudes. So they put a huge investment of calories into telling us, hey guys, watch out. And we're right there now, and the powers that be are freaking out. So this is a big, huge as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely. So you mentioned 11,804 years. A friend of mine, I was talking about this with the other day, asked me, what sort of scientific evidence do we about exactly when the last cataclysm would have happened?
There's a number of archaeological references, depending on which area you wish to get into. The Egyptians, for instance, have a whole series of hieroglyphs that are on the coast of Africa, not in Egypt proper. These were translated by some people in the 20s and the 30s, and they're a step-by-step, blow-by-blow recreation of what it took for the people that were the Atlanteans to get out of Atlantis and end up on the coast of Africa to survive.
Wow.
It included the number of ships that survived, the construction of those ships. We find that in Abydos, in the middle of the desert in Egypt, are stored all of these ships that remarkably resemble to a certain extent the low freeboard ships that you would see from the Vikings. Still, nonetheless, huge navigators of incredible ocean situations. So we find all these pointers in an archaeological sense for the Egyptians and the Atlanteans there. Right. If we swap over to the Vedic texts, we find that it's not a myth, it's a quite literal description of these people surviving in small boats. In the basic mythology of the Vedas, it wasn't Noah that built a giant boat and saved all the animals. It went the other way. It was a single man by the name of Manu who saved the woman who knew the names and uses of all of the plants. A very, very necessary skill if you're going to rebuild agriculture and the Vedic tradition of Ayurveda, which is, medicines from plants. And so in their flood myth, there is huge levels of details about the actual occurrences. You just have to read them as actuals as opposed to a mythological story construction. So we have tons of evidence of that. Further, the Mayans chose to divide the 11,000 or the precession of the equinox, 26,000, it's not quite 26,000 year cycle, into 5 segments. And that was rather curious because most of the other areas divided it into more calendrically focused 12 segments, 6 segments, something along those lines. The Mayans, though, had a very unique perspective, and they showed that on the 5th of every cycle there was a climatic occurrence. And we can now go back 5,115 years and see indeed that was the time that Iceman got frozen in the meadow. The fellow they dug up in the glacier in Italy, right?
Right.
You're familiar with him?
Yeah.
He was frozen 5,200 years ago. The grass underneath him was not frozen. It rotted. So he went to sleep one night with that wound and then woke up encased in ice. At that same time, we had ice masses form and shift in the highlands above the Amazon. So there was a climatic problem, a mini cataclysm on the 5th of the cycle. And that was the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the end of the third world and the beginning of the fourth world. The end of the fourth world is now coming in 2012. And just on the 1/5 cycle, we should expect some climatic conditions. And lo and behold, we've got some rather chaotic climate going on at the moment. Global warming is just hogwash. Humans have absolutely no participatory component of this. You can deal with that just as a logical thing and say,
Definitely.
Okay, if humans are causing global warming, then who's driving the SUVs on Mars? Because it's got global warming too, or Venus, or the pole flips in the outer planets. There's all kinds of stuff going on in a rather chaotic fashion in our solar system, and it all relates to a solar system-wide cataclysm that's building. So we have tons of evidence of previous cataclysms. Further, we have some level of evidence that may include tens of thousands of pole shifts on a more or less 11,500 year cycle. Further, we have the reconciled problem of why the ages of the precession are not regular. Getting into detail there with the precession of the equinox, you would think that because it's a stellar component, that it would be the cycles would be the same length from precession to precession to precession. That each and every one of these 26,000 year cycles, more or less, would be the same length. And that is not the case, and we've never been able to reconcile that, but now we know that when these cataclysms occur, they alter the orbital path of the planet, as well as our rotation speed. So we go, in one case, the Mayan recorded a year of exactly 360.2 days. And daily hours Instead of 24, we're actually 23.7 in our way of reckoning. Plus, the Mayan went down to 10,000th of a part in their calculation, levels that we could not get to at this point. Further, if we want to get really weird, we know that there's now evidence that there's evidence plastered all over everything that says that the powers that be are expecting this in 2012. If you just look at the dollar bill and some of their statements, and you see some of the hidden symbols within our dollar, every day you're looking at Nova Order Seclorum, which does not mean New World Order. It means New Order of the Ages, meaning the processional ages.
Right.
So they've actually encoded that, even our powers that be, even the secret societies and the doofuses that think they own us, are encoding all this information right in front of your face.
That's it.
I could go on and on and on for days about this stuff, but if you really want proof of it all, you need to read Charles Hapgood, you need to read Graham Hancock, you need to read Maurice Cottrell and Patrick Garrell.
Definitely, yeah. I've been listening to some interviews by Garrell lately. He's got a lot of great information. That's incredible stuff, and it all seems to fit together.